right now, somewhere in your bathroom.
Um, there is probably a box of tampons.
Mm-hmm.
Or, maybe some pads or a menstrual cup just sitting in a drawer.
Yeah, just tucked away.
Right, exactly. And you probably bought it at a store without, like, a second thought. You just pulled it off a shelf, tossed it into your cart. And, I mean, it's just there. It's this completely mundane part of modern existence.
Absolutely.
We honestly treat it with the exact same level of passing thought as, like, buying a roll of toilet paper, right?
Well, I mean, it's a logistical necessity for, half the global population. It's this biological utility that we just manage with a highly sanitized, highly commercialized solution.
Which is crazy when you think about it.
It really is. It's so deeply woven into the fabric of everyday life, and it's so heavily supported by these massive industrial supply chains that the very idea of it being any other way seems, I don't know, almost absurd to us today.
And this is the paradigm shift that totally blew my mind. For 99.9% of human history, none of that existed.
None of it.
No pads, no tampons, definitely no brightly lit pharmacy aisle on the corner. For over 300,000 years, women managed this biological reality with absolutely nothing but like dirt, bark, moss, and whatever the ecosystem immediately provided.
Just what the earth gave them.
Right, which begs a pretty massive question, like how did they survive that? Well, to figure that out, our mission on today's deep dive is to explore how ancient humans handled menstruation, focusing heavily on caloric intake and lactational amenorrhea.
It is going to fundamentally reshape everything you assume about the female body.
Oh, entirely. We are talking about a biological cycle that our ancestors barely even experienced. Okay, let's unpack this math for a second because I cannot get over the gap between the numbers in our sources today.
The math completely dismantles what we consider to be the biological baseline of the human female. I mean, we really project our modern experiences backward, don't we?
We totally do.
We just assume that the biological rhythms we experience today are the exact same ones our ancestors navigated. But we really need you to completely suspend your modern assumptions here.
Okay, let's lay out the statistics right off the bat. If you are a modern woman living in an industrialized country today, you will menstruate roughly 450 times in your lifetime.
460.
Yeah, that is about 40 years of monthly cycles, pretty consistently, from a first period around, age 12 all the way to menopause somewhere around age 50.
Right.
But, and this is where it gets wild, a woman living 50,000 years ago experienced a tiny, almost unbelievable fraction of that.
To really grasp that fraction, we should look at the landmark research of anthropologist Beverly Strassman.
Right, she studied the Dogon people, correct?
Exactly. She spent an enormous amount of time studying the Dogon people of Mali. And the Dogon are incredibly valuable for this specific type of anthropological research.
Why is that?
Well, they are a traditional agricultural society, but crucially, when Strassman was conducting her primary research in the late 1980s and 90s, they were one of the last populations on Earth still living entirely without modern contraception. Oh, wow. So no birth control pills, no synthetic hormones, no IUDs to artificially regulate or suppress a natural cycle.
None of it. Nothing at all.
Yeah.
They provided a real-world, modern-day window into a historically natural reproductive pattern.
That is fascinating.
Yeah, and Strassman didn't just ask them questions. I mean, she conducted a rigorous longitudinal study. She lived alongside them in their villages. She tracked the reproductive status of dozens of women over long periods.
So she was getting actual biological data.
Exactly. She was analyzing urine samples to track hormonal fluctuations, documenting pregnancies, and recording visits to their specific menstrual structures. And what she calculated was just staggering.
What was the number?
Dogon women, on average, menstruated only about 100 times in their entire lives.
100. Compared to 450. I mean, that is less than a quarter of the modern total.
It is. And, that number actually drops even further when we look beyond agricultural societies.
Wait, really? It goes lower than 100? Oh, significantly lower. When anthropologists and evolutionary biologists study purely hunter-gatherer populations, so groups whose lifestyles, daily energy expenditures, and diets closely mirror our Paleolithic ancestors.
Right, so like the truest ancient baseline.
Exactly. The lifetime number of periods just plummets. Researchers place the number for hunter-gatherer women as low as 50.
50 periods in an entire human lifespan. I really want the listener to just sit with that number for a second. That is not a typo.
It's hard to wrap your head around.
It really is. Think of it like putting miles on a car. Modern biology is like driving on the highway every single day for 40 years, whereas ancient biology is like taking the car out of the garage maybe once or twice a year.
That's a great analogy.
But wait, I have to pause here. I need a massive clarification from you. We are biologically identical to humans from 50,000 years ago, right?
Yes, anatomically and genetically, we're the same.
Our DNA sequence hasn't fundamentally changed. Our reproductive organs are exactly the same. So how does the exact same physiological hardware produce 50 cycles instead of 450?
Well, it is the same hardware, but it is operating in a completely alien environment, running on an entirely different fuel source.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
Well, to the listener, ask yourself what it would mean for your entire life trajectory, your physical comfort, your daily planning, your hormonal fluctuations.
Yeah.
If an event that currently happens 12 times a year suddenly only happened 50 times in your entire life, it completely redefines what normal actually means.
It really does. So to answer how that drastic reduction is physically possible, we have to look at the very beginning of an ancient woman's life.
Right, exactly. We have to look at her biological starting line, which was delayed by years compared to today.
We're talking about the caloric deficit here. Because right now, in the U.S., the average age of a girl's first period, the medical term being menarche, is around 12 years old.
Right, and in many cases, it's trending even earlier than 12.
Yeah, but the sources note that in hunter-gatherer societies, that starting line was significantly delayed. It was closer to 16 or 17 years old.
It's a huge gap.
It is. I think a good way to visualize this is to imagine the human body like a smart power grid during a citywide blackout.
No, I like that.
The body looks at the low caloric energy available and starts shutting off non-essential rooms. The heart and lungs stay on, obviously, but the body looks at the reproductive wing of the house.
Which is very energy hungry.
Exactly. It requires massive energy to heat and light, so the body just leaves the breakers switched off until it senses a massive surplus of power.
That is a highly accurate way to frame the endocrinology happening behind the scenes. The human reproductive system is an immense biological luxury.
A luxury, right?
Building an endometrial lining, shedding it, maturing an ovarian follicle, preparing an egg, and ultimately building and sustaining an entirely new human life.
It's a lot of work.
It takes a colossal amount of metabolic energy. The body will not switch the system on unless it is absolutely certain it has the physiological bank account to actually fund it.
So mechanically, how does the body actually measure that bank account? I mean, how does the brain know how much energy is in reserve at any given time?
It measures adipose tissue, which we commonly call body fat. Specifically, it uses a hormone called leptin.
Leptin, okay.
Yeah, fat cells actively secrete leptin into the bloodstream. And the hypothalamus, which is a tiny region at the base of your brain acting as the body's master control center, constantly monitors those leptin levels.
So if leptin is low, the hypothalamus knows that body fat is low.
Precisely. And ancient hunter-gatherer girls were remarkably lean.
Incredibly lean, right? I mean, they were walking miles every single day, foraging alongside their mothers and their community.
Carrying heavy loads of water, digging up fibrous tubers. Their daily caloric expenditure was massive. Furthermore, they only ate when food was successfully gathered or hunted.
Right. There was no pantry, no fridge to grab a snack from.
There was no guaranteed caloric surplus. Almost every calorie consumed was immediately burned through rigorous physical activity or, utilized for basic skeletal and muscular growth. So the fat cells just aren't producing enough leptin.
Exactly. And without sufficient leptin, the hypothalamus refuses to release a chemical called kisspeptin.
Kisp.
Yes. Kisspeptin is the essential trigger that tells the body to start producing gonadotropin-releasing hormone, or GnRH. And without GnRH, the entire reproductive cascade remains entirely dormant.
The breakers stay off.
The breakers stay off. What's fascinating here is that because ancient bodies simply did not have the caloric surplus to trigger this cascade early, the first 16 or 17 years of an ancient woman's life passed without periods even being part of the equation.
The biological starting line is just pushed back nearly half a decade compared to a modern teenager. That is wild.
It really highlights how human biology acts as a brilliant, ruthless, internal accountant.
Yeah.
It constantly runs a cost-benefit analysis, weighing immediate survival against future reproduction based purely on the immediate caloric availability.
But as significant as that delayed menarche is, shaving 4 or 5 years off the front end only accounts for maybe 50 or 60 cycles out of that lifetime total of 450, right? That's right. The math still doesn't add up.
We still have a massive mathematical gap to close to get down to 50, which means the real reason that number drops so drastically has to lie in what happened immediately after that first cycle finally began at age 16 or 17.
We have to examine the ancestral reproductive loop, specifically focusing on the most metabolically demanding phase of early human life.
And here's where it gets really interesting, because the timeline of an ancient woman's life, once that biological switch finally flipped, was intensely different.
Very different.
Without any modern contraception, most women became pregnant within a year or two of experiencing their first menstrual cycle. So you have a first period at 17, maybe a few cycles over the next year.
Right.
Then pregnancy. That is 9 months of pregnancy with zero menstruation. And then comes the phase that I found to be one of the most staggering parts of this entire deep dive.
The breastfeeding phase.
The breastfeeding phase.
And we must be very careful here not to equate ancient breastfeeding with modern breastfeeding.
Because they're not the same thing at all.
They are practically two entirely different biological phenomena in terms of their intensity and their impact on the endocrine system.
Right. It wasn't like pumping for 15 minutes before commuting to work or feeding an infant on a strict scheduled 3-hour rotation. The sources use the Kung people of the Kalahari Desert to illustrate this deeply.
Yes, the Kung are a perfect example.
Mm-hmm.
Among the traditional Kung, mothers practice what anthropologists call continuous contact and on-demand nursing.
And the sheer volume of that demand is hard for modern parents to even conceptualize.
It is. A Kung infant is essentially carried in a sling, with constant skin-to-skin contact for the first few years of life. Researchers observing this dynamic noted that infants would nurse roughly 4 times an hour.
Wait, 4 times an hour?
Yes, 4 times an hour.
That is, I mean, that's just constant.
Often for just a minute or two at a time, sure, but constantly throughout the day and night. And this wasn't just for the first few months.
How long did it go on?
This intense high-frequency nursing continued for 3 to 4 years straight for a single child.
3 to 4 years of nursing dozens of times a day. Okay, so we know this creates a state called lactational amenorrhea, but I want to really dig into the biology here.
Let's do it.
Wait, I understand that nursing makes milk, but chemically, how does a baby nursing actually tell the ovaries to shut down? Those seem like two completely separate systems. One is in the chest, the other is in the pelvis.
It seems like a disconnect, but it is a brilliantly designed feedback loop, and it all centers around a hormone called prolactin.
Prolactin.
When an infant suckles, the physical stimulation of the nerve endings in the nipple sends electrical impulses up the spinal cord directly to the hypothalamus in the brain.
Back to the master control center.
Exactly, and the hypothalamus responds by dropping its production of dopamine.
Dopamine, wait, like the reward chemical, the feel-good chemical.
The very same,
Yeah.
but in this specific pathway, dopamine acts as an inhibitor. It acts like a physiological brake pedal.
Okay, a brake pedal for what?
As long as dopamine is flowing to the pituitary gland, prolactin production is blocked. But when the nursing stimulation causes dopamine to drop, the brake is released.
I see.
The pituitary gland immediately floods the bloodstream with prolactin.
And prolactin's primary job is to tell the mammary glands to synthesize milk, right?
That is its primary function, yes. But prolactin has a secondary, equally crucial systemic effect. When prolactin levels are sky high, which they persistently are when a child is nursing on demand day and night, 50 times a day.
Yeah, they'd have to be constantly elevated.
Exactly. That massive wash of prolactin actively suppresses the release of that crucial hormone we discussed earlier,
Right.
GnRH.
Oh, so it goes all the way back up to the brain to turn off the master switch.
It puts a hard brake on the entire ovarian cycle. With high prolactin suppressing GnRH, the pituitary stops sending signals to the ovaries.
The ovaries just go to sleep.
They essentially go to sleep. No ovarian follicles mature, no egg is released. And if there is no ovulation, the body does not receive the hormonal signal, specifically the drop in progesterone, that tells the uterus to shed its lining.
Therefore, no period.
Exactly. No ovulation means no period.
Wow. Let's map out this typical ancient woman's reproductive life for the listener, because the timeline is just wild to think about.
It really puts it in perspective.
So you get your first period at 17, you get pregnant by 18. That's 9 months of no period. Then you deliver the baby and immediately begin this extreme, continuous, on-demand breastfeeding.
Right.
For the next 3 to 4 years, your prolactin levels are through the roof. Zero ovulation, no cycle at all for 4 years.
Nothing.
Then eventually, around age 4, the child fully weans, the nursing stops, the dopamine goes back up, the prolactin drops, and your cycle finally returns.
But not for long.
Right, you might have a few months of menstruation, and then you become pregnant again.
And that loop repeats. 9 months of gestation, 36 to 48 months of lactational amenorrhea, a brief window of cycling, and back into pregnancy.
That is exhausting just to think about.
This intense reproductive pattern repeated 5, 6, or 7 times over the course of her life, essentially until her body reached menopause.
When you actually do the math on that loop, some women literally went an entire decade between periods.
A decade.
The monthly reality of modern women managing this biological shedding every single month of her adult life, that was an incredibly rare event for our ancestors.
It was an absolute anomaly. Human biology actually evolved to operate optimally in that suppressed state.
Wait, really? The suppressed state was the optimal one?
Yes. The physical architecture of the female body evolved over hundreds of thousands of years to be constantly navigating either a severe caloric deficit, the immense metabolic drain of pregnancy, or the equally draining state of heavy, prolonged lactation.
So cycling was the exception.
The default baseline state of the ancient female body was actually amenorrhea, the prolonged absence of menstruation. Regular, uninterrupted monthly cycling was the exception, not the rule.
And this is a big but, even if it was the exception, even if it only happened 50 times in a lifetime, it did still happen.
It did happen, yes.
And when those brief windows of cycling opened up, we are talking about a world where there was no sterilized cotton, no synthetic polymers, no drugstore on the corner. So physically, materially, how do they absorb the blood?
That is where early human ingenuity and a profound intimacy with the local biome come into play. The honest answer is that they utilized whatever materials the immediate ecosystem offered that possessed absorbent properties.
And the sources highlight some fascinating organic solutions here. Soft moss was apparently one of the most widespread materials utilized across wildly different cultures and climates, right?
Yes, very common. Specifically sphagnum moss, the kind you commonly find in damp bogs and wetlands.
What makes moss so good for this?
Well, sphagnum moss is an engineering marvel of the natural world, making it a brilliant choice from a purely biological standpoint. If you place a leaf of sphagnum moss under a microscope, you'll see it is composed of 2 different types of cells.
Okay.
It has living green cells that photosynthesize, but the vast majority of the plant consists of large, dead, empty cells called hyaline cells.
Dead, empty cells.
Yes, and these empty cells are perforated with large pores. They function as microscopic water reservoirs.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Right. Through simple capillary action, water, or in this case, blood, is drawn directly into these empty cellular cavities. Because of this unique architecture, sphagnum moss can naturally hold up to 20 times its own dry weight in liquid.
20 times. I mean, that legitimately rivals the highly engineered synthetic superabsorbent polymers used in modern disposable diapers and maxi pads today.
It absolutely does. And furthermore, sphagnum moss possesses an incredible secondary trait. The plant actively engages in ion exchange with its environment, which naturally lowers the pH of its immediate surroundings.
Meaning it's acidic.
Exactly. This means the moss is mildly acidic, giving it natural antiseptic and antibacterial properties.
Which is perfect for this.
It is incredibly useful for mitigating odor and preventing infection. Women would gather this moss, dry it to maximize its absorbent capacity, and pack it between their legs, often securing it inside strips of remarkably soft, brain-tanned animal skin.
But what about in regions where they didn't have access to damp bogs or moss? Like, what about arid environments?
Human adaptation is limitless. In drier climates, women process dried grasses, weaving them into absorbent bundles. In forested areas, they harvested specific tree bark, pounding and chewing the fibers until they separated into a soft, cotton-like material.
Chewing the bark. That is dedication.
It is. In other regions, they simply relied on highly absorbent pieces of tanned animal hide, which could be washed in a river and reused.
It requires such a deep tactile knowledge of the land, to know exactly which bark contains fibers that can be pounded soft without causing contact dermatitis, or to know exactly which specific moss in a vast wetland absorbs the most liquid without crumbling.
It's incredible environmental literacy.
It really is. It is a stark contrast to just pulling a plastic-wrapped bleach cotton product off a supermarket shelf without knowing a single thing about how it was made or what it's even made of.
It represents a profound connection to the earth that we have largely lost today, but, as resourceful as the moss and bark were, there is another significant piece of ethnographic data that challenges our modern sensibilities even more deeply.
Oh, right. The nothing at all paradigm. This part is wild.
It is. Ethnographic accounts from multiple indigenous communities around the world, particularly those living in warmer equatorial climates, describe women actively choosing to use nothing at all.
Nothing.
They might wear slightly darker woven wraps or skirts during that specific time of the month to obscure staining, or they might simply allow the blood to flow freely while they continued with their daily tasks, periodically washing themselves in a nearby river or stream when it was convenient.
Yeah. Free bleeding. Walking around the camp, preparing food, tending fires. So if women aren't hiding this and they're bleeding freely in the middle of a working village, that creates an immediate logistical reality.
It does.
How does a busy, labor-intensive community physically accommodate that? The sources say they build specific infrastructure. This brings us to the concept of the menstrual hut.
Ah, yes. The menstrual hut, or menstrual lodge, is a deeply misunderstood phenomenon. We find evidence of these specific architectural structures in dozens of distinct cultures, spanning across almost every inhabited continent on the globe.
And we have to push back incredibly hard here against our modern assumptions.
You really do.
Because when a modern Western person hears the phrase menstrual hut, the immediate image that comes to mind is one of banishment. We assume it was a primitive form of punishment, that women were exiled to the harsh outskirts of the village because they were deemed unclean or dirty or polluted by their biology.
That interpretation is heavily colored by a Western patriarchal lens, largely influenced by later Abrahamic religious texts, being projected backward onto ancient indigenous practices.
So it's basically historically inaccurate for these early cultures.
Largely, yes. Now, while it is true that in some later, more complex agricultural societies, rigid concepts of ritual purity and pollution did begin to emerge, the deeper anthropological record tells a vastly different, far more empowering story about what these spaces actually represented.
Let's bring in the specific examples from the sources because they completely flip the script on the banishment theory. Take the Yurok people of Northern California.
The Yurok are a fantastic example.
Among the traditional Yurok, a menstruating woman wasn't considered dirty or polluted in the slightest, was she?
Not at all. She was considered to be at the absolute height of her spiritual power.
The height of her power.
Yes. For the Yurok and many tribes with similar cosmologies, seclusion in a specialized lodge was absolutely not a form of exile. It was a period of intense concentration.
Like a meditation retreat almost.
Sort of. Her inherent energy during that specific biological window was deemed to be so intense, so spiritually potent, that it was actually incompatible with the mundane, ordinary tasks of daily life.
And she wasn't removed because she was contaminated.
Exactly. She was removed to protect the mundane world from her heightened spiritual state and to allow her the quiet space necessary to focus and channel that energy.
It's treating the biological event with awe and reverence rather than disgust. I just love that reframing. And then there's the example of the Kalasha people of Pakistan, which presents an entirely different, incredibly practical benefit to these structures.
Yes, the Kalasha are a brilliant example of communal biological management. They construct large communal menstrual houses known as the bashali. And the bashali function as something much closer to a communal spa or a structured societal retreat.
A biological vacation. I love that concept so much.
It was a vital, protected space exclusively for women. They gathered there together away from the demands of the village. They told stories, they shared specialized foods, they laughed, and most importantly, they rested.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to vividly remember the harsh context of ancient daily life.
It was grueling.
Right. These were women who spent every other day of the month, every day of the year, working from dawn until dark. The physical labor required to keep a hunter-gatherer or early agricultural community alive was relentless.
Constant labor.
Foraging for miles, processing tough foods, building shelters, constantly carrying infants, tending massive fires. The caloric burn and physical exhaustion were immense.
And the structural brilliance of the Bashali system was that while the women were resting in the lodge, the entire social contract of the village temporarily shifted.
The men had to step up.
They did. The men and the older children were strictly expected to manage the household, secure the food, and handle all the daily chores without them.
Wow.
For a woman whose entire existence was defined by constant, grueling physical labor, this cultural practice, this mandated retreat, was quite literally the only built-in break that biology afforded her.
It was a socially mandated pause, a time to stop working, bond with other women, and just exist without obligation.
It highlights a profound level of communal support and structural empathy that we largely lack in modern capitalist societies. The entire society openly recognized the biological event and immediately adjusted the division of labor to accommodate it, rather than expecting the woman to quietly pretend it wasn't happening and push through her normal workload in secret.
It's honestly beautiful when you frame it that way. And this deep societal reverence for menstruation didn't just provide a physical break from work. According to some incredibly provocative anthropological theories in our sources, it may have been the very foundation of human culture and symbolic art itself.
Yes, this is where the research transitions from endocrinology and sociology into the deep realm of human evolutionary theory. And it centers around one of the most ubiquitous, enduring materials ever found in ancient archaeological sites.
Red ochre.
Red ochre.
Let's set the scene for the listener here. Imagine archaeological excavations in South Africa, specifically sites like the Blombos Cave, dating back over 100,000 years. What researchers find buried there, covering early stone tools, covering bone fragments, and smeared on cave walls, is red ochre.
It's everywhere.
It is an iron-rich clay that produces an incredibly vibrant, blood-red pigment. And they didn't just find a few casual smears. They found ancient processing workshops, right?
Full workshops. Abalone shells used as specific mixing bowls, grindstones covered in red dust. Early humans were deliberately grinding this iron-rich earth into a fine powder, mixing it with animal fat to create a paste and applying it to their skin and surroundings.
It was an industry.
It was. It is quite literally one of the oldest, most widespread manufactured substances in the entire human story. For a long time, anthropologists just considered it early art. But the sources point to a theory that connects this massive red pigment industry directly to menstruation.
Yes, the Female Cosmetic Coalition's hypothesis. It was proposed by anthropologists Camilla Power and Chris Knight.
It is a highly debated theory within the field, but it is deeply compelling. It attempts to explain exactly why this specific red pigment became so globally prevalent at the exact same evolutionary moment that human brains were rapidly expanding and complex symbolic culture was forming.
Break down the evolutionary logic of this theory for us, because to understand why they were painting themselves red, we have to understand a major anatomical difference between human evolution and other primates, right?
We do. The theory is rooted in the concept of concealed ovulation. If you look at our closest primate relatives, chimpanzees or baboons, for example, when a female enters her fertile window, when she is actively ovulating, she displays unmistakable physical signs.
Like the swellings.
Yes, she develops large, brightly colored estrous swellings. Every male in the primate troop knows exactly when she is fertile.
It's basically a giant neon biological billboard that says, reproductive window open right now.
Exactly. But as hominids evolved into modern humans, human females entirely lost those visible physical signs of ovulation. We developed concealed ovulation. You cannot look at a human female and definitively know if she is fertile that specific day.
But why did we lose it? What's the evolutionary advantage of hiding fertility?
Evolutionary biologists theorize that concealed ovulation evolved as a strategy to secure long-term male support.
Okay, how does that work?
Well, human infants are born incredibly helpless, with massive, energy-hungry brains. A mother needed help provisioning food to keep that infant alive. If a male knew exactly when a female was fertile, he might mate with her and immediately leave to find another fertile female.
I see.
But if ovulation is concealed, if he never quite knows when the fertile window is open, his best strategy for reproductive success is to stick around, continually mate with her, and help provide food and protection to ensure the offspring survives.
Okay, so the estrous swellings disappear. Ovulation becomes a secret. But that creates a massive new evolutionary signal. Because if ovulation is hidden, menstruation, the actual bleeding, becomes the single most obvious, undeniable visual marker of a woman's reproductive status.
That is the crux of the issue. Menstruation clearly signaled to the group. This woman is not currently pregnant. She's not currently experiencing lactational amenorrhea from nursing an infant, and therefore she will soon be fertile again.
But according to the Female Cosmetic Coalition's hypothesis, that clear signal actually created a dangerous problem for the women in the tribe.
Yes. Power and Knight argue that if a single specific woman was visibly menstruating, she would instantly attract the overwhelming attention of all the males in the group.
Because she's the only one showing signs of impending fertility.
Exactly. This could lead to intense male competition, violence, and crucially, it would divert male provisioning away from the pregnant or nursing mothers who desperately needed that food and support right then.
So if one woman is bleeding, the males focus entirely on her and ignore the women who actually need the calories to keep the current infants alive. That threatens the survival of the whole group.
Precisely. So the theory proposes that early human women fought back against this dynamic by forming coalitions. When one woman naturally menstruated, the other women in the group would take that red ochre, that iron-rich paste they were manufacturing in places like Blomber's Cave, and paint themselves, artificially simulating menstrual blood on their own bodies.
Whoa, wait. So they are essentially faking it. They are using red clay as a physiological decoy.
They are acting in deep strategic solidarity. By all painting themselves red simultaneously, they entirely scramble the biological signal.
That is genius.
They amplify the message of fertility, but they control what that message means. They force the males to provision the entire group of women rather than competing over just one. It is a massive, coordinated evolutionary power play.
I am genuinely mind-blown by the synthesis of this. If this theory holds true, if early women were deliberately grinding up red clay to simulate blood in order to control the social dynamics and food distribution of their tribe, then the very first symbolic act in human history wasn't just drawing a random animal on a cave wall.
No, it wasn't.
The first time a human being deliberately altered their appearance, the first time they decorated a physical body with pigment to convey a complex, abstract social meaning, it wasn't just art for art's sake, it was blood. It was women leveraging the imagery of menstruation to build alliances and ensure survival.
That's the theory.
Human culture, symbolic thought, art itself may have literally been born directly from the menstrual cycle.
It is a stunning reframing of human origins. It posits that the bedrock of early human symbolic culture was female solidarity centered entirely around their shared reproductive biology. It elevates menstruation from a hidden, shameful bodily function to the very catalyst of human cultural evolution.
But then, how did we get from a world where red pigment simulating menstrual blood was the powerful bedrock of human society to a world where we wrap white cotton in crinkly plastic and desperately try to hide it in our bathroom drawers? Like, how did we get from 50 sacred society organizing cycles to 450 hidden sanitized cycles?
That transition is the story of the commercial revolution, and on an evolutionary timescale, it happened in the blink of an eye.
For thousands of years, methods evolved relatively slowly. We have some historical evidence from ancient Egypt, though the sources note it's quite thin and highly debated, of women allegedly softening the fibers of papyrus to fashion something loosely resembling a primitive internal tampon.
Right. And as we move forward into medieval and early modern Europe, we see the widespread, standardized use of woven cloth rags. Women would cut specific strips of linen or cotton, use them, wash them heavily, and reuse them for years.
Which, by the way, is exactly where the colloquial phrase on the rag comes from. It was a literal physical description of the primary technology of the era. But the massive world-altering turning point that led to the modern aisle at the pharmacy didn't happen until remarkably recently. It happened in the trenches of World War I.
Global wars often brutally accelerate both medical and material technology, and this was a prime example. During World War I, French nurses working on the front lines in chaotic field hospitals were dealing with horrific, heavily bleeding shrapnel and artillery wounds.
Yeah.
They were supplied with a newly invented surgical bandage made of a material called cellucotton.
Cellucotton, a wood pulp product.
Yes. It was developed by the Kimberly-Clark Company. It was manufactured from processed wood pulp, meaning it was incredibly cheap to produce compared to actual cotton. And more importantly, these battlefield nurses quickly noticed something profound.
What was that?
This cellulose material absorbed blood far, far better than any woven cloth or standard cotton they had ever used. It was essentially hyperabsorbent. And being incredibly practical and resourceful, the nurses began repurposing these sterile surgical bandages to manage their own menstrual cycles.
And capitalism immediately enters the chat. After the war ends in 1918, the Kimberly-Clark Company suddenly has a massive unsold surplus of this cellucotton material. The military contracts dry up.
Right.
But they hear through the grapevine about what the frontline nurses were doing, and they pivot their entire business model. In 1920, they take that exact same wood pulp surgical bandage material, wrap it in a fine, commercially woven gauze, and release it to the general public.
They named it Kotex. a portmanteau of the phrase cotton-like texture.
Kotex, the very first commercially successful, mass-produced disposable menstrual pad. But introducing it was a massive cultural hurdle, right? Because in 1920, you absolutely could not talk about menstruation in public or in advertising.
The marketing challenge was immense.
Yeah.
Kimberly-Clark had to devise ways for women to buy it without ever having to speak the words aloud to a male pharmacist.
So how do they do it?
They popularized the silent purchase system, where a discreetly wrapped box of Kotex would sit on the counter next to a coin box. A woman could simply drop her money in the slot and take the box without making eye contact or speaking a single word.
It is the ultimate triumph of convenience, paired with the ultimate enforcement of shame. But its material impact cannot be overstated. Within a single generation, the way women had managed this biology for over 300,000 years. The carefully gathered moss, the pounded bark, the meticulously washed reusable rags, the deep required connection to the local environment was entirely replaced by a disposable single-use product you could buy in a cardboard box and throw away in the dark.
The technological shift was absolute, but as we always find on this show, rapid modern convenience often masks a profound hidden cost.
It always does.
And this is where the deep dive takes a crucial turn into modern health implications. Because we aren't just talking about a change in what material we use to absorb blood, we are talking about a fundamental physiological change in how often that blood is flowing.
We have to look at the dark side of this modern convenience. And it brings us right back to that staggering math we started with. The 450 modern cycles versus the 50 ancient cycles. Biologists and geneticists have a very specific scientific term for what the modern female body is currently experiencing. They call it an evolutionary mismatch.
An evolutionary mismatch occurs when the environment an organism lives in today shifts so rapidly that it no longer matches the specific environment. Its biology was painstakingly engineered for over millions of years of evolution.
Remember the starting line we discussed. Your body was engineered over hundreds of thousands of years for a life of delayed menarche at 17, followed by frequent pregnancy, and years of intense dopamine-dropping, ovulation-suppressing breastfeeding.
A life in which the ovaries rarely ever engaged in the cycling process.
But today, the environment is entirely different. Modern girls hit puberty much earlier, often around 11 or 12, due to higher body fat percentages and constant nutritional surplus. The breakers turn on early.
Yes, much earlier.
Then modern women actively delay pregnancy for decades, or perhaps never choose to get pregnant at all. And if they do have children, they breastfeed for a fraction of the time ancient women did, often supplementing with highly caloric formula, which means the physical demand drops and prolactin never reaches those prolonged ovulation-suppressing heights for years on end.
The physiological result of all these modern choices is that modern women ovulate practically every single month, uninterrupted, for decades.
Exactly. The reproductive system is constantly redlining.
It is.
Okay, let's get into the deep tissue of this. Why is that specifically dangerous? Why is ovulating 450 times an evolutionary mismatch?
To understand the danger, we have to look closely at the microscopic cellular mechanics of ovulation itself. Ovulation is not a gentle process.
No.
No. Every single time a woman ovulates, a mature follicle swells, and the surface epithelium, the outer wall of the ovary, literally has to tear open and rupture to release the egg into the fallopian tube.
Is a microscopic physical injury.
It is repeated localized trauma, and after the tissue ruptures, it leaves a wound. The cells surrounding that rupture have to rapidly divide to heal the tissue and close the gap. Every single ovulation triggers a localized inflammatory response and a burst of rapid cell division in the ovarian tissue.
And a core rule of biology is that every single time a cell divides, it has to unzip and copy its DNA.
And every single time DNA is copied, there's a statistical chance for a copying error, a typo, a genetic mutation.
Right.
The human body has incredible repair mechanisms, and most of the time, the immune system catches the typo and fixes it or destroys the cell. But occasionally, if the division happens rapidly enough and often enough, a mutation slips past the defense mechanisms.
This raises an important question. If you are ovulating 450 times instead of 50 times, you are subjecting the delicate tissue of the ovaries to 9 times the amount of physical trauma, 9 times the amount of rapid cell division, and mathematically, 9 times the risk of a cancerous genetic mutation taking hold.
That mathematical compounding of risk is the exact crux of the mismatch. Modern oncological researchers have directly linked this dramatically higher number of lifetime ovulations in modern women to significantly increased rates of ovarian cancer.
Wow.
Furthermore, the constant monthly hormonal cycling, the endless spikes of estrogen that furiously rebuild the thick endometrial lining of the uterus, followed by the drops in progesterone that cause it to shed, increases the risk of endometrial cancer. The constant buildup, rupturing, shedding, and rebuilding takes a massive physiological toll.
So these highly prevalent reproductive cancers,
Mm.
they are, to a large degree, modern problems.
From a strict evolutionary perspective, yes. While cancer has always existed in human history, reproductive conditions like ovarian cancer, endometrial cancer, and even the rampant spread of severe endometriosis were virtually non-existent in ancestral hunter-gatherer populations.
Because they just didn't cycle enough.
Their bodies simply did not cycle often enough to accumulate that immense level of cellular risk and tissue inflammation.
That is staggering. It completely flips how we view our own biology. We culturally think of a regular monthly period as the ultimate sign of a healthy, functioning, vital female body.
Hmm.
But biologically speaking, historically speaking, operating in that state of constant, uninterrupted cycling is actually incredibly stressful on the system.
It is.
Which brings up a really provocative revelation regarding a totally different modern medical invention. The birth control pill.
The oral contraceptive pill.
Yeah.
It occupies a very complicated space in modern culture. It is frequently demonized as an unnatural chemical intervention, a synthetic manipulation that completely divorces a woman from her natural rhythm.
Right. But when you look at it through the specific lens of this evolutionary mismatch, it takes on a completely different meaning. Because the primary function of the combined oral contraceptive pill is to suppress ovulation entirely. It introduces a steady stream of hormones that trick the pituitary gland into never sending the signal to the ovaries to mature and release an egg.
Exactly. The pill artificially flattens out the dramatic hormonal spikes and valleys. It stops the ovaries from constantly rupturing and healing. And medically, the data reflects this beautifully. We know that women who take the combined birth control pill for several consecutive years see a dramatic, long-lasting reduction in their lifetime risk of developing both ovarian and endometrial cancers.
But it's not because the pill is some miraculous, targeted cancer-fighting medicine.
No, it lowers those specific cancer risks because it accidentally acts as a biological time machine.
I love that framing. A biological time machine that rewires the system.
It is remarkably accurate. By suppressing ovulation and halting the constant cellular division on the surface of the ovary, the pill artificially recreates the dormant, suppressed hormonal pattern that our ancient ancestors experienced entirely naturally through constant pregnancy and years of lactational menorrhea.
It gives the body a break.
It finally gives the ovaries the prolonged rest they were evolutionarily designed to require. It mimics the ancestral baseline default state of amenorrhea.
So in a bizarre, almost unbelievable twist of modern science, taking a synthetic, laboratory-created daily pill actually forces the modern female body to operate closer to its 300,000-year-old Paleolithic baseline than not taking the pill does.
It is one of the most profound ironies of modern medicine. We had to invent a highly advanced, heavily researched pharmacological tool just to chemically recreate the biological peace and tissue safety that our ancestors got completely for free from their physically demanding environment.
We have covered an immense amount of ground today, weaving through biology, anthropology, and modern medicine. Let's trace the thread of this journey, because we started in a very mundane, sterile place and ended up completely redefining human history.
We really did.
We started by looking at a simple, mundane cardboard box of tampons sitting in a bathroom drawer. And by unpacking the long history behind it, we uncovered how a life of constant physical motion, strict caloric deficits, and intense on-demand breastfeeding kept ancient periods incredibly rare.
50 cycles instead of 450.
Exactly. We looked at the math that proved human biology was built for 50 cycles, not 450. We explored how ancient women utilized an incredibly deep tactile knowledge of the earth, relying on the microscopic capillary action of sphagnum moss and the fibers of softened bark as their original management tools.
And we challenged our modern biases, too.
Yes, dismantling the myth of the unclean exile, and discovered instead how ancient indigenous societies revered this biological time. They created structural safety nets like the bashali, communal retreats that served as desperately needed, socially mandated breaks from relentless physical labor.
A vital pause.
And incredibly, we explored the Female Cosmetic Coalition's hypothesis, looking at a 100,000-year-old ochre in South African caves to see how this rare, powerful cycle and the evolutionary need to mask it may have been the literal physical catalyst for the very first human symbolic art. Finally, we traced how the commercial revolution of World War I bandages turned this deeply communal, rare event into a highly sanitized, hyper-frequent modern occurrence, resulting in an evolutionary mismatch that fundamentally alters cellular risk and impacts female health today.
It serves as a perfect example of why we must constantly look to our deep evolutionary past to truly understand our complicated present. The female body is a living archive of human history, but we have largely forgotten how to read the text. And I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder, one that builds on the incredible journey we've taken today. The sources noted a very specific modern behavior. Modern women buy these commercial products without speaking, sliding them across the counter or scanning them at self-checkout, and they use them without being seen, as if the biological process must be hidden at all costs. But consider the ancient reality.
Right.
If our ancestors viewed this rare biological process as a time of immense spiritual power, a critical moment for vital communal bonding, and the literal physical inspiration for the very first human art, what profound psychological toll does it take on modern society to treat that exact same process as a shameful secret? What does it do to the human psyche to tightly wrap our foundational biology in plastic and throw it away in the dark? By hiding our natural biology, by sanitizing it out of the public sphere,
Okay.
what kind of collective ancient power are we denying ourselves today?
That is exactly the kind of question that permanently changes how you see the world around you.
Yeah.
It will definitely make you look at that box in your bathroom drawer a little differently tomorrow morning. Thank you all for joining us on this journey. Until next time, keep diving deep.